Hey everyone, Ron with the Idaho Society of the Sons of the American Revolution, and today we are going to learn about yet another ancestor, which is always fun and exciting. As you can see, we have Jim McClain, and he has been involved in a wide variety of positions and roles. And to be honest, he's really been a very integral part of keeping some chapters alive and focused, and a gigantic benefit to the local chapters, the state chapter, and the organization as a whole. So thank you for signing up, and tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe some of the positions you've held, and just this is your chance to be talk about yourself, which I know it's kind of hard sometimes, but go ahead.
Sure. Thanks for the introduction, Ron. I joined the SAR 40 years ago. My mom was a state regent in Kansas, very involved in the DAR, and she was in multiple ancestry organizations, the Huguenot Society, the Daughters of the American Colonists. There were 4 or 5 others too. I forget at this point, but wow. You know, I was working and was not really involved in Kansas, and I moved to the state of Idaho 10 years ago, and then I retired about 5 years ago, and that's when I started doing a little more family history and family search. I thought, well, you know, in Kansas, I remember they had a color guard that did various things, and I would go to functions, and I wanted to kind of get involved in that. And, you know, long story short, as soon as I got involved, I became secretary of the Boise, and at that time, you know, the state society. And then, you know, as you know, that I held the president level of both the chapter of Fort Boise and the state society for an interim period there. And now I'm kind of off everything. So a little bit of a breather. So
I got some breathing room now.
Exactly. So
you've been, I didn't know this. You've actually been a part of for 40 years.
Yeah, I got my 40-year pin this spring.
Wow.
Yep.
My goodness. That is,
as I mentioned, my mother was very involved in the state of Kansas. And then her mother, her grandmother, going back to the 1920s, were all DAR members. And actually, somewhere out in the storage, I've got my grandmother's certificate, and it's huge.
Oh,
it's 3 times the size of our certificates.
Oh,
so.
Yeah. Well, I knew that you were obviously involved for quite a long time. I just didn't know it was for that long. I mean, there can't be, even nationwide, through all the state society and the 33,000 members or so nationwide, there can't be that many that have been in as long as you, is there?
I know in Idaho there's 2 others that have more than 40. You know,
but that's like that's just 2. I mean, it'd be interesting to know. You're probably in an elite group by yourself for sure.
I don't know about that.
Well, on many ways you are. You're just too humble. So, well, yeah, you've been really you know, important to the SAR. And when I first came in years ago, I believe it was as chaplain. I mean, you were very welcoming and informative and personable, and really just kind of made everything approachable, and it was awesome. And
that's back when we did those breakfast meetings, and
yeah.
You and your wife came in, and you got you know, your rosette that morning and your certificate. I remember very well.
So. Yeah. So, I mean, it's just, thank goodness you were there, because you really are an attribute. And although you don't hold any positions, you're kind of probably enjoying that for the time being. But just know that because of you and your efforts and your being humble and helpful and always there. I mean, you travel to meetings when, I mean, it was a long way. I mean, you've just gone above and beyond, which is impressive. So
thank you, Ron.
Nobody's ever said thank you. I'll say it publicly and to you personally. So well, let's dive in. Like, some people have some lucky people know 2, 3, 5 ancestors. Do you have more than one that you're aware of?
Yes.
Oh, how many do you have? How many do you have?
Well, I would say there's definitely 5.
Wow.
3 out of my 4 grandparents all go back to colonial times, with their direct ancestors. So I have yet to start the paperwork to do, to get all that verified. Several of those folks have DAR or SAR members from 50, 100 years ago on them. So it should be fairly easy. And then, if you look at Ancestry or Family Search, there's some others that kind of come and go.
Yeah.
But I would say there's definitely 5. And one of them was a private and one of them was a major, and one of them was a POW. So I also have 2 War of 1812 ancestors
Oh my
too.
goodness. Wow. So we can talk about all of them if you want, or you can.
No,
the
one that I'm
right.
an SAR member is who
All
I
right.
am.
Well, that's cool that you have multiple. I mean, I know of one, and I don't know very much about mine. So you have 5. That's awesome. Well, let's talk about the one that got you into the SAR, and what's his name, and what do you know about him? What colony did he live in? What position?
Sure. If you let me roll, I'll
Go.
kind of
Yeah.
give you a period here. We've got a family book that was published in 1903 on the Tracy and Tanner family. So a lot of this is documented in here, and a lot of great verbiage. And also those families go on through the Mexican War, Civil War, and even the members in here who were, a couple of them were in the Spanish American War.
Oh my God.
So my great grandmother used this book to verify her DAR membership 100 years ago. And of course, there's even some more information there. So my ancestor, his name was Josiah Tanner. And actually, I named my son Tanner after him.
Oh.
He was born in 1754 in Mecklenburg, Virginia, and died in 1807, Oldham, Kentucky. He was a lieutenant, and it was his 3rd, from what we can tell, it was his 3rd enlistment. And he was in the militia and the horse cavalry and in South Carolina. And his homestead at that time was about 20 miles from where the Battle of Kings Mountain, Virginia occurred, which is right on that border of North and South Carolina. And my mom actually went to the national park, or maybe it's a state park that's there at the battle site. She brought a book, and it's a very thorough book. It's called With Fire and Sword. And I mean, it's a fascinating read. I've read it half a dozen times. My ancestor, as we know from his wife, who filed after he had passed away, like a lot of our members, their ancestors' spouses had filed a petition for the pension.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's what she lived on in her old age, of course. From what we know, he was under Captain McBee's company of the South Carolina line under James Williams' forces, which were consisted of about 7 or 8 different colonels of different, of 2 or 3 different states from Virginia, South Carolina, North Carolina, who were approaching Colonel Ferguson's forces of Tories. And there was kind of some skirmishes, and the Southern campaign was very interesting. This is in the year 1780 in October. And there were some, just before that, there were some losses on the American side. And the British thought the South was fully formed. They thought there would be thousands and thousands of Tory regulars that would join up, and many of them did, of course. But that was more on the coastal side, where trade was very important to those folks. But once the atrocities that occurred under Cornwallis, Major Tarrington and his raids, where they took no prisoners, it was that backcountry types, mainly the Scotch Irish, who were very independent, rose up and gathered their militias and started pursuing what was Captain Ferguson's Tories. Now, those Tories, they were all in uniform, the red uniforms. They had with them probably also about 200 British regulars. So it was a force of about 1,400. And the militia was a force pretty equal and close size. And of course, you know, the ancestors that were militia, they wore their buckskins, they wore, you know, what they had basically. And the book covers everything dealing with how they dealt with prisoners at the end, how they hung them, how they buried many of them, how the wolves took care of the dead. We actually, you know, my ancestor, they parked their horses at the bottom of this mountain. They call it a mountain, but it's a big hill. And they descended up that hill that day. And I know that my ancestor under Captain McBee came around from the northwest corner, his group, and up that hill. And he was actually wounded in the elbow. And of course, his homestead was like 20 miles from there. And in the family book, it states that Martha protected him with his musket. They were still worried at that point if the Tories were gathering or if Cornwallis was sending troops in, you know, to kill all the militia folks. So that's what we know about him and his history there. He did survive the war, and he and the Tracy family, the Tanner and Tracy family, about 40 members, all headed to Kentucky in you know, after the Revolutionary War, because they were all granted ground. You know, a lot of our ancestors, if you find information on grants, you know, property grants, you can find out, you know, if their Revolutionary War service that way too. So
wow,
it's an interesting history there. So what else do I know?
Well, it's really cool that, I mean, you have a book. I mean,
Yeah.
What a great resource to have.
And this last week I was in Washington, D.C. and my son is there doing an internship with one of the Idaho senators, and it's still on my bucket list, is to go to this battle site. It would be, you know, probably an 8-hour drive from DC, but that's on my bucket list still.
Oh, nice.
So.
Do you know of any? So obviously he was wounded at the Battle of Kings Mountain. Are you aware of any other battles that he served in, or did he?
Nothing is nothing is under the pension of that, but you know, in the book of 1903, it said it was his third enlistment.
So he had to have been involved with who knows how many.
I'm sure he was at the Battle of Cowpens, which was earlier that year.
Yeah.
And then he was probably with that colonel under Horatio Gates. You know, a lot of prisoners were I'm guessing, I don't know. But, you know, he would have stayed in that, being in militia in that North South Carolina, you know, those late battles and late in the war there. So
wow,
I'm guessing.
I think it's interesting that, because, you know, I mean, if you watch some documentaries, read some books, they sometimes, two things. They sometimes make it sound like the British were very kind and very proper, and in some instances they were, but they don't often. Some do, but I don't think it's a true picture because, you know, Tarleton, Banish Tarleton, and all those, but there was some skirmishes, battles, times where they were absolutely brutal, and killed the whole family and the livestock. And I don't want to paint the British as all were horrible or all were super nice. I think there was a mix, but there was some times when, like you had said, they didn't take prisoners. I mean, so it wasn't as prim and proper as some people, you know, claim. And obviously, you know, you're aware of that, and he obviously experienced some of that. And the second point was, many times you will hear that, you know, enlistments were up and people bailed, and they served their 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, and they bailed, and that's true. But I think it's important that people understand that, and many people that we've done this interview type with is, you know, he did 3 enlistments, and I mean, I would like to think that I would be so bold and brave, but I mean, so your ancestor, I mean, he was brave and very patriotic, and anybody that went through not getting paid, not having shoes, not having basic life necessities, and complete their first tenure or whatever, and then they do it again, and then they do it again. I just think that's impressive, and it speaks volumes to those people like your ancestor that had not 1, not 2, but multiple enlistments. That's amazing to me. I would like to think that I would do that, but who knows, right?
Right.
So you had obviously some work done, you had a book to draw from and all of that. Was the obtaining, for those of you just starting with this video, you can't just say, you know, I think this guy is my relative and he was in the war, so I'm a member, right? I mean, it is you have to prove it, like in a court of law. It seems like this isn't going to be adequate enough. You have to prove it. And so sometimes providing all that documentation to become a member of the Sons of the American Revolution is quite difficult. And sometimes maybe somebody prior to you already did all that work and you just happen to be the son of. What was your process like? Was it easy, hard? Did it take long?
Like I said, my mother, my grandmother, my great grandmother were all DAR members. So that's pretty well back there. But you know, my application was done in pen and paper. And actually, you know, the guy that sponsored me, who was the registrar of the chapter in Kansas, was a World War I veteran. Oh. And actually the SAR they're still probably in the process, a former member of the Idaho Society, Clay Hall, they've gone back, and anybody who has been a member for more than like 20 years, there's some cutoff point there. They've all gone back and redocumented. You know, so much of this stuff is new now with family search and ancestry, that they're rechecking a lot of those old documentation. And so I know that Idaho, he cleared every member and verified through the SAR nationals that our ancestors are legit. Wow. Just in case somebody back 100 years ago wanted to get the SAR or DAR. So now, I mean, and he filled me in on a few things that were, you know, verified in the book and some other things, but you know, it was a verbal conversation. But
yeah,
so
that's cool. So at least it sounds like, since your family was so involved, that it was easier than some others.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
cool. Is there anything else about him that is unique, or other things that you want to share about him in particular?
Oh, in the family book, it's just, you know, the verbiage written even 100 years ago. It's just amazing how it said how he was wounded, got home, and his wife protected him at the front door with a musket, nursed him back to health, and that there was a trap door in the cabin in case the Tories were to come. And that, he had 14 children.
Oh, wow.
And this whole group of the whole Tanner family, along with the Tracy family, and the Tracy family, he also was in that same battle. And, there were extended members and they were a close-knit community, how they all, with teams of oxen, about 60 family members, for a month journey traveling, to Kentucky, to new lands. That's just amazing. A lot of our ancestors, moved to Kansas or Missouri in the 1850s or 1830s, but to do that back then and go through those mountains of Tennessee and the Carolina, it just would have been amazing.
Yeah, and there's no highways or freeways, right? I mean, it was
Indian trails, dirt trails.
Not only difficult to even fathom walking it, let alone moving everything that you own, but it was dangerous.
Yeah,
I mean, to top it off, I think many people don't. I think a lot of people think, we won the war, everybody was so on board with fighting Britain, and then after we won, everything was great, and everybody just moved easily, and we populated the West Coast, and here we are. And I'm like,
you said something a while back, a third of the people were true patriots, not maybe at the beginning, but, after common sense and after the takeovers of New York and Boston, that kind of thing. And the third of the people were Tories, and a third of the people kind of went with the wind, or they took advantage wherever they could.
For sure.
And in this book, many of the officers and their families all moved to Canada that were Tories, and of course their land was taken. And it would have been interesting times. That's all I can say. So,
well, I don't know if that book is available on Amazon or Books or any of that, but if I can find it, I'll put a link, because I definitely want to read that.
Okay.
It sounds pretty awesome. If if you had the opportunity and you could take him to coffee or get a glass of Madeira, right? And sit and talk with him, what questions or question would you ask, or what would you want to know about him?
First question would be, what was it like parking your horse that morning on that crisp October morning, looking up at that hillside with trees and rocks and just the autumn leaves? What was your concern, and how confident did you feel, all the forces surrounding that mountain? What did you think was going to occur? And then, what was it like being wounded, and what was the care like? And then, once you learned how we dealt with, we hung a lot of the prisoners, 2 or 3 days in the march going east. If you knew about that, and how did you feel about the brutality? I mean, there were only like 60 lives lost on our side, hundreds and hundreds on the British, the Tory side. How do you really feel about how brutal that one day was? And then did you ever really know years later that was one of the straws that broke the back, when they lost the South, and Charleston ended up surrendering? I mean, did you even know years later how big that campaign was for the Revolutionary War? So that's 3 or 4 questions I would ask him.
Yeah, it would just be in I would just be in awe of God. I just, for a variety of reasons. Oh, it would be cool to go back and talk to Jesus or talk to whoever. But if you think about people that were involved, I mean, your ancestors, may not be carved into Mount Rushmore, but each patriot ancestor was invaluable. And they may not have the name recognition and stuff like that. And that's why I love doing these, because they are so important, because without those people that we don't know their names, and this is part of the reason why we're doing it, we should honor them and know their names. There wouldn't have been anybody for Washington to lead. There wouldn't have been anything for, Henry Knox or Nathaniel Greene, or at the time Benedict Arnold to lead. And so it's the unknown, or the not so talked about patriots that really made the difference. And when you were talking about the brutality, I wondered, now we now know, they didn't, of course, back then, about PTSD, the trauma, and those things that take place. And you wonder, after the war, that had to, some of the things they saw and experienced, and in some cases participated in, that had to be,
Oh yeah.
and what, I wonder what they did with that, because they didn't go to they didn't get medication, they didn't go to a counselor, they didn't get any of that. And I'm just wondering how, because how old, let's see, he passed away when?
1807.
So he long after the war ended.
Yeah.
Gosh, that would be interesting to know, because some of
Well,
the
it's like my own father. He was first cav in the Pacific Theater in World War II, 5 campaigns.
wow.
That first cav division did not take POWs. He didn't even talk about it until he was in his 80s. It's just amazing what those folks who saw a lot of battle did. So
this isn't a question I usually ask, but do you have a favorite person from, not including your ancestry, but do you have a favorite person in the American Revolution war that you like to study, or you think, you read books on him or her, and is there anybody that you just love to admire or learn about in particular?
I kind of like Jefferson.
Yeah.
Fascinating guy. Right now, he was the War of 1812, but Andrew Jackson is who I'm reading now. So, a little later in time, but
during the Revolution, I think Andrew Jackson got some retribution because of how he was treated, right? So
yeah, he got slapped by a sword, I think, didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
So, So, and then just last week, spent a week in Washington, D.C., and just all the oil paintings, all the, the Washington Monument, everything there. It just was kind of challenged me on my interest in history again, just in the Revolutionary War. It just fascinating. So
when you go read or see kind of what's left of the Declaration, because it's very faded, and at least for me, I stood there and, like, these hands touch this parchment and sign this, and my wife and I just did a podcast show about the 4th of July, and what the signers of the Declaration and risked, and also what your ancestor and anybody's ancestors risked. It wasn't just, we lost the war, I'll go home and England can continue to manage our affairs. It was treasonous, and the penalty was losing your life in most cases. And so when you're there at a battle scene, or a monument, or seeing those documents, and I've always said this, it's just there's something about seeing it firsthand or being near that area that I don't know if it brings it to life, or if it just, knowing that you've read and seen and documentaries and movies or whatever, and then you're like, I'm here.
Right.
Like this is where it happened, and it's just amazing. So you gotta complete your bucket list and go to Kings Mountain. That was a that's a I want to read that book now, because I mean that battle I know a little, but I know it was a big deal and a big turning point in the war. So, and your ancestor was in it. How cool is that?
Right.
I mean, it's awesome. Um, so you've held probably every position almost in a variety of chapters and at the state level and all of that. What is the one thing or more that you really like about being a member of such a small and elite organization? I mean, every organization, right? Every organization has its issues and obstacles, but what are some things or one thing that you really like about being a member of the Sons of the American Revolution?
I like our outreach education portion. As you know, I've got the Revolutionary War uniform. It's not original, or it's not
Yeah.
that quality or anything, but from a distance, it looks good. And just, events over the past 5 years, from Veterans Day events to flag retirement ceremonies with the VFW, to a few parades here and there, and our Patriot chest presentations. I was kind of involved in that a couple of years ago, did a number of things.
And for those of you that don't know, the Patriot Chest is a collection of flags and relics, and a lot of them are authentic to the period, but some of them are not. But we go into schools and share what and how they use these back in the day. So it's geared for schools. But yeah, go ahead.
Sure. And then, my portion of that was the musket and the drill on the musket, and some of the actual discussions with kids or various groups on what it was like, in a battle. Roughly you'd get 2 or 3 shots off and fix bayonets, and, it was hand to hand from there on. Just some of that was very exciting to me, and just being involved in it. Now I'm on this side of the state, and the chapter here is fairly small, so not a lot is getting going there. But any members, I challenge them, get a uniform. It doesn't have to be a uniform. It could be a militia member with a linen shirt and a rope belt, whatever it may be, and just get involved. So that portion of the education is what excites me about this organization. So
Very cool. Well, it sounds like you have the cool story, and it's always neat if you know of at least one battle that your ancestor fought in, which was a big one. And then if he was at Cowpens, that was another huge battle, and he probably, with 3 enlistments, served in some others that we may not know about. But maybe in your free time of not holding positions for a change, it'll free up some time to do a little studying. Is there anything else that you would like to share about your ancestor, you, the organization, or anything else before we close?
It's a great organization. We've had some struggles. The struggles with COVID shut down a lot of things, and it's just I hope the society and the chapters will remain strong, and yeah, we get members, but there's always that percentage that tends to just gets a certificate and they're done in life. And I just hope some people will test the water, stick their foot in a little bit, and get involved, which this last spring a lot of that has happened. So I just hope we see a continued growth toward membership and getting active. So,
and I think that's great. I want to echo that, because an organization is only as good as the activity of its members, really. And it's not uncommon of any organization, whether it be 5 members or 500, that it typically there's a real small percentage that does the bulk of the work. And there are people that, hey, I can join and I got my certificate. It's invisible when I do move it fast. I have my certificate and I'm a member, cool, and I'm done. And there'll always be people like that. But I think if people really got engaged and did what they could, not only would it help the organization, but the fact of you getting out to a school or doing a video interview like this, it's a positive thing, and it's typically fun. And my wife and I did the Patriot Chest several times, and my wife and I teach the American Revolution and the U.S. Constitution. And I didn't go to college to be a teacher, and I teach at a co-op. But the ability to share what and how our country was formed, it's exciting for me, and then it's exciting to them, because when somebody is really passionate about something and they just love to share that knowledge. I mean, those kids in our classroom and the kids that see the Patriot Chest that you've been involved with, it's unlike, okay, learning a science project and X plus Y is X and you're done. They forget about that stuff. But when you have somebody come in and present and share that my fourth, fifth, sixth great, whatever it is, great grandfather fought in the Revolution, that sticks. We've been teaching for, I think, 4 years, and we have students that have since gone on to college, and we may bump into them or I get an email, and they still remember that class or a topic on when I shared about my ancestor. And that says something in today's world where every single thing in the world is on a phone, and easily distracted. But if they're going to remember that, you don't have to go to every school in your area. Go do one a year. And I think not only would it be beneficial for you and the organization, but you're impacting kids, and kids are our future. And in this day and age, they need all the positive affirmations and help and knowing the real history. So I just wanted to echo that. So if you don't have anything else, we'll just end, and I will put a link to that book if it is available. And if you have any other further questions for Jim, let me know, and I'll get you an email address. If it's okay with him, I'll just put it in
Sure.
And because he's been in the organization for 4 decades, right? He's held positions. He knows a lot. And I encourage you, if you're not a member watching this and you have an idea that you might be, I can tell you what, doing the research and reading archives and pulling church records out of Pennsylvania from 1760 sounds maybe not fun, but man, when you start, it's exciting. You get to be a detective, and you get to dig, and it's fun, and that work pays off by being able to join an organization with 33,000 members. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that have this ancestry, but for one reason or the other, they haven't done the work. So do the work and become a part of this. It's pretty special. Well, thank you so much for your time and your sharing of Josiah, right? Want to make
Josiah
sure
Tanner.
Josiah, and some of the battles that he's been in. And again, thank you for your not many years, your many decades of service, of which minimal in Idaho, you've really kept alive and moved forward. So thank you so
Thank you,
very
Ron.
much. You bet.